It was a calm January afternoon in Tullamore, a small Irish town known more for music than for tragedy. 23-year-old Ashling Murphy, a beloved schoolteacher and gifted traditional musician, laced up her runners and stepped out onto the Grand Canal towpath, a familiar trail, a safe place. She had no idea someone was waiting. What happened next would shock the entire nation and echo far beyond Ireland's borders. Ashling didn't come home that day. What began as a routine jog turned into one of the most heartbreaking and widely publicized crimes in modern Irish history. And within hours, her name would become a national outcry. Because this wasn't just the murder of a young woman. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of safety, a wake-up call that no woman, no matter how careful, was truly safe. And as the truth unraveled and the killer was unmasked, Ireland demanded justice. But even justice couldn't bring back what was stolen. This is the story of Ashling Murphy, and the rage, sorrow, and reckoning that followed. It was around 4 in the afternoon on Wednesday, January 12, 2022, when Ashling Murphy left her school, Durrow National School in County, Offaly, where she taught first-class students. Like many days before, she headed for a jog along the Grand Canal in Tullamore, a peaceful, scenic route she often took. It was broad daylight. The sun hadn't even set yet. This was a routine run, safe, normal, familiar. But sometime between 4 o'clock and 4:30, everything went horribly wrong. Witnesses later told Gardaí they saw a woman being attacked along the canal bank. One man cycling nearby intervened, trying to stop the assault. Emergency services were called immediately. When paramedics arrived at the scene, Ashling Murphy was still alive, but just barely. Despite every effort to revive her, she was pronounced dead on sight. She had been strangled. There were signs of a brutal, sudden attack. The scene was sealed off. The area became a crime scene, and Gardaí launched a murder investigation within the hour. There were no clear answers, no immediate arrests, no obvious suspect. And as the news broke later that evening, a young woman murdered in broad daylight while jogging, shockwaves hit every home in Ireland. Social media exploded. The front pages ran the story by morning. This wasn't just another news headline. This was personal. Because Ashling could have been anyone's sister, daughter, teacher, or friend. In the immediate aftermath of Ashling Murphy's murder, Gardaí moved fast. The area around the canal was sealed off. Dozens of officers began combing the towpath for clues, clothing, footprints, anything that could point to who did this. But the first 48 hours were full of tension and confusion. Gardaí initially arrested a man in his 40s, a local man who happened to be near the scene. His photo and name were circulating on social media within hours. But he was innocent. After being questioned, he was released without charge, and suddenly the case was back to square one. Ireland was on edge. That's when CCTV became key. Investigators pored over footage from homes and businesses near the Grand Canal and surrounding areas, and quietly a name started surfacing. Jozef Puška, a Slovakian national in his early 30s living in County Offaly, he wasn't a stranger to the area. He wasn't a known criminal either, but something stood out. Around the time of the murder, Puška had checked into a hospital in Dublin with suspicious injuries. Gardaí were tipped off by hospital staff who noticed his wounds and unusual story. DNA evidence was quietly gathered. Surveillance footage placed him in Tullamore at the time of the murder, and suddenly Gardaí had their suspect. On January 18, 2022, 6 days after Ashling's death, Jozef Puška was arrested, and that arrest changed everything. Until January 2022, Jozef Puška was not a name anyone in Ireland recognized. A 31-year-old Slovakian national, he had been living in the country for several years with his family. He worked various jobs in the construction and maintenance sector and lived in Mucklock, County Offaly, just a short distance from Tullamore. He wasn't known to police for any violent crimes, but investigators noticed something strange about his movements in the days following Ashling Murphy's murder. According to trial records, Puška left Tullamore after the attack and traveled over 100 kilometers to Blanchardstown Hospital in Dublin. He claimed to have been injured in a bicycle accident, but the wounds on his hands were consistent with a struggle, not a fall. Hospital staff were suspicious. They alerted Garda. Then came the forensic match. DNA collected from under Ashling's fingernails, where she had likely scratched her attacker in a desperate fight for her life, matched Jozef Puška. The evidence was overwhelming. On January 18, 2022, Garda officially arrested and charged Puška with the murder of Ashling Murphy. His mugshot spread like wildfire, and Ireland saw for the first time the face behind the name. He appeared in court, barely speaking, flanked by Garda. Cameras rolled outside the courthouse. Crowds gathered. The atmosphere was tense, emotional, angry. For many, it wasn't just the crime, it was the randomness of it. A young woman, a daylight jog, and a stranger with no known motive. Ashling didn't know Jozef Puška, and Puška didn't know her. It was the randomness, the brutality that made this murder feel so terrifying. It took nearly 2 years, but in October 2023, the trial of Jozef Puška finally began in Dublin's Central Criminal Court. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, Ashling's family, and the public sat side by side, all watching the man accused of one of the most horrific crimes in modern Irish history. From day one, the prosecution laid out a devastating case. They presented CCTV footage placing Puška near the scene of the murder. They played clips showing him cycling into Tullamore that afternoon and leaving again shortly after the time Ashling was killed. They brought in forensic experts. The DNA found under Ashling's fingernails, a match. The cuts on Puška's hands, consistent with a struggle. But the most chilling moment came when Garda took the stand and read aloud Puška's own confession recorded in the hospital after he was arrested. He admitted to stabbing a woman on the canal path. He claimed he didn't know why he did it. Later in court, he would try to change his story, claiming the confession was false and that he was innocent. But the jury wasn't buying it. For 6 weeks, the trial played out. The defense tried to raise doubts, suggesting police pressure and misidentification. But the evidence was clear, the witnesses were credible, and the forensic data was irrefutable. On November 9, 2023, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty, unanimously. Puška showed little emotion, but Ashling's family wept. Members of the public sobbed quietly. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, not of shock, but of release. After 664 days of grief and waiting, justice had been served. The judge handed down the mandatory sentence, life imprisonment. And outside the courtroom, people lit candles again, not in protest this time, but in memory. From the moment news of Ashling Murphy's death broke, something rare happened in Ireland, something almost sacred. The entire country stopped. Within 24 hours, thousands gathered in silence, holding candles and signs with just one phrase: she was just going for a run. In cities across Ireland, Dublin, Cork, Galway, Limerick, Waterford, and in small towns and villages from Kerry to Donegal, people came out. Men, women, children, teachers, students, elderly survivors. Some knew Ashling, most didn't, but that didn't matter, because this felt personal. The Taoiseach Micheál Martin called it a devastating blow to the nation. President Michael D. Higgins said the killing had united the Irish people in grief and in determination that no more lives would be lost this way. Ashling's students' children, just 6 or 7 years old, placed flowers outside their school. One girl left a drawing that read, "I love you, Miss Murphy." A vigil was even held outside the Irish embassy in New York City. Messages poured in from across the world from artists, politicians, athletes, and ordinary people who saw themselves in her. But this wasn't just grief, it was outrage. People demanded change, demanded answers, demanded to know why in 2022 a woman could be murdered like this in public doing something as ordinary as jogging. This wasn't just about Ashling anymore. It was about every woman who had walked home with keys between her fingers. Every girl told to stay safe. Every mother who texted, "Call me when you get in." Ireland was mourning Ashling Murphy, but it was also mourning what it had allowed to go ignored for far too long. Ashling Murphy was more than a teacher, more than a musician, more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a bright light in her community. And even after her life was stolen, her voice never truly fell silent. In the weeks following her murder, her family made a quiet but powerful decision. They wouldn't let her story end in tragedy. They created the Ashling Murphy Memorial Fund, a foundation that carries forward the things she loved most: traditional Irish music, education, young talent in rural communities. From scholarships for children learning traditional instruments to youth programs in education and sports, the fund is transforming grief into growth. Her alma mater, Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, introduced an annual music bursary in her name, helping young musicians pursue what Ashling once dreamed of doing herself. At music festivals across Ireland, fiddle players now gather not just to perform, but to remember Ashling. In classrooms, her former students continue to draw and sing because that's what she would have wanted. Her name now stands for hope, not horror. Her parents, Kathleen and Raymond Murphy, have spoken rarely, but when they do, their message is clear. She was doing everything right, and we want her remembered for who she was, not just for what happened. And they've succeeded. Because today, Ashling Murphy's story isn't just a case file, it's a legacy. Ashling Murphy's murder didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in a country where women had long been warning about fear, about street harassment, about walking home with keys clutched tight and phones on standby. But for too long, those warnings were ignored. That changed in January 2022. In the days after Ashling's death, something cracked open in Ireland, a long overdue reckoning. The conversation around gender-based violence surged from quiet corners into national headlines, legislative chambers, and living rooms. Thousands began sharing their own stories of close calls, assaults, fear, and frustration. Hashtags like #SheWasJustRunning and #EnoughIsEnough trended for days. It wasn't just women talking anymore. Men joined too as allies, brothers, fathers. And policymakers listened. The Irish government fast-tracked parts of its zero-tolerance strategy on domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence. They announced a new national agency solely focused on tackling violence against women, increased funding for shelters and services, a plan to introduce comprehensive relationships and consent education in schools, more support for Gardaí training in handling violence and abuse cases. Public transport operators launched text alerts for women who feel unsafe on trains or buses. Universities introduced safe routes and check-in protocols. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't immediate, but it was a start. Because Ashling's death didn't just break hearts. It forced Ireland to look in the mirror, and what it saw wasn't good enough. So for the first time in years, maybe ever, the country decided to try to change. Not just for Ashling, but for every woman who's ever whispered, "I'm almost home." Just when the Murphy family and the nation thought the case was closed, a new headline brought fresh pain. Jozef Puška appeals his conviction. In April 2024, only 5 months after being sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Ashling Murphy, Puška's legal team filed an official notice of appeal. The appeal argues that he was denied a fair trial, questioning the admissibility of his confession and claiming that the media coverage created a prejudicial environment. The move stunned many. After all, this was a case built on direct DNA evidence, video surveillance, witness testimony, and a confession made under police supervision. To most observers, the case felt airtight. But under Irish law, every convicted person has the right to appeal, even those found guilty of the most serious crimes. The Court of Appeal granted Puška legal aid, meaning his appeal would go forward with publicly funded legal support. That decision alone sparked outrage online and in newspapers. Many questioned how the system could allow the convicted killer of a schoolteacher to access state-funded legal resources. As of now, the appeal is pending review with no hearing date confirmed. It may take months or longer for any decision. And for Ashling's family, it means something brutal, reopening wounds that never fully healed. The justice system must follow due process. But for many watching this unfold, there's only one truth that matters. Ashling Murphy is gone. And nothing, no appeal, no legal twist will ever change that. Ashling Murphy wasn't famous. She didn't chase headlines. She taught first class in a rural school. She played the fiddle in pub sessions. She jogged after work to clear her head. She lived a life that was ordinary until the day everything changed. Her murder didn't just shake a community, it cracked open a country's soul. In the weeks that followed, Ireland stood still. Not just for Ashling, but for every woman who's ever been afraid to walk alone. For every parent who texts, "Let me know you got home safe." What happened to Ashling Murphy forced Ireland to confront a hard truth. We've been too quiet for too long, but her story didn't end on that towpath. Her music plays on through scholarship students. Her name echoes in courtrooms, classrooms, festivals, and memorials. And her face, smiling, young, vibrant, is burned into the heart of a nation that refuses to forget. Because what was taken from her can never be replaced. But what she left behind, that changed everything. Ashling Murphy's life was short, but her legacy, it's louder than ever.